Hi, everybody. Jack Russell, president of OneZone. Welcome to That One Podcast. We are so excited to have Ryan McCarty with us. Before we get started, you will see throughout the podcast as we go through this series, I'm going to have different shirts on. So today, Ryan, we're going to pick different non-for-profits. And so cool. This is the Hamilton Heights Education Foundation.
Love it.
I'm selfishly on their board, so that's why I'm wearing it. And I have that t-shirt in my closet. So
I love it. I thought you meant you were going to change shirts as we were doing this
each
podcast.
Segment has a different...
Each segment has a different. Okay. I didn't know how many segments we were going to do today.
No, just one. Just this shirt.
No, I love it. Great.
But thank you so much for being our first guest on our podcast. Yeah. You and I, over the last few years, I feel like we could just sit down and breakfast turns to lunch, lunch turns to dinner to talk about leadership, talking about our journeys. And I think that's what's so fun to just sit down and chat with you all the time. Yeah. So when my team and I were trying to figure out what we're going to do for a podcast, Ben on my team was like, well, just call Ryan because you'll just sit there for like 3 hours and talk.
I need every business in this whole area to think, just call Ryan.
Yes. Well, when we talk about leadership, we're going to get into that. But I want to talk a little bit about you and your story. Culture of good. We're going to talk about that. Yeah. But let's talk about pre-culture of good. Yeah. Who Ryan is and the things that you have been able to accomplish to get to culture of good.
Yeah, long journey. The first 20 years of my professional career were in nonprofit work. Yeah. That felt very purposeful and meaningful. And I think that concept of doing work that felt meaningful came from my childhood. So if we go all the way back to my childhood, when I was 6 years old, really tragically lost my mom to suicide. And at the moment, my dad was a heroin addict, and that became a defining moment, right? We have these defining moments in our life. And when we go through something so tragic and so traumatizing, it starts to inform, I think, kind of not just who we are, but what we do in life and our personal why.
Right.
And so, I went into full-time ministry. I was a pastor. My wife and I got married early when I was 20 years old. Mm-hmm. She had a daughter, ready-made family at 20, had another daughter at 21. So I was a dad of 2 daughters and started a Bible study when I was 23 years old, and that turned into a church in Marion, Indiana.
That's awesome.
And just the journey of kind of self-discovery, but also how am I going to use this pain for purpose?
Yeah.
How do I take what I went through as a kid and have that empathy and compassion, which is very natural, right? Because we go through something ourselves. Yeah. And that becomes what I would say is our own passion in life. We've come past it. Yeah. It's compassion, right? So we get this passion in life to make an impact in other people's lives and kids. And so, it was just this journey of discovering how can I make an impact.
Yeah.
And so pastored that church for 18 years in Marion, and long story short, or I guess short story long, eventually met Scott Moorhead.
Yes.
And he's the head of Round Room, and at the time was the CEO, and still is, of TCC, located right here in Fishers, Indiana, and or not here, but near in Fishers, Indiana, and was able to kind of kick this idea of what I had been doing in very meaningful, purposeful work for so many years, and bring that into the corporate world and say, where are the gaps at? What are we missing here? Because people are showing up to work, they don't feel meaning, they don't feel passionate about just what they have to do. Why not provide them a higher purpose, a sense of why they do what they do every day?
Yeah.
And so that's really, my background has been in nonprofit work. And so very soulful, meaningful type work. And now it's how do we do this on an everyday basis in our workplaces?
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
I love that. So then you created, that's the culture of good.
That's the culture of good. And So he and I met, I was actually preaching one morning in the church that we had started as a Bible study, had grown, and We had a big Presbyterian building with 30-foot stained glass windows. It looked like an old Gothic castle, you know. Cool. It's beautiful, beautiful congregation, like community of faith that was really very less about the religious side of it and far more about how are we all collectively making an impact in our city and meeting tangible needs and just simply saying we love you to our community. And I think that was really important. And so I was speaking about how your why should equal your what, not just having what you do in life, but having a why that compels you, as we've been talking about already. And afterwards, he was like, hey, we need to grab lunch. And so over chips and salsa, we started dreaming up this idea of like bringing passionate, compassionate work into his business and affording his opportunities the permission to care for each other and their community and make an impact together. And so
that's powerful for someone like that to go, hey, this is what I want to invest in my organization, and finding a person and then saying, I'm going to be dedicated to that, and seeing now years of being
13
part of
years.
That. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty crazy. I mean, that's a wonderful wild story in the sense of as a leader of an organization to say, I'm going to invest in my people this way.
Right.
Is pretty powerful.
It's huge.
And it changed, I'm sure it changed, I mean, no pun intended, but it changed the culture.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah. You know, at first I thought it was going to be, just call it something around community, because that's really what culture ends up becoming, right? Yeah. This far more of a relational connection and emotional connection with each other. Yeah. And that's what it became, and the culture of good has been going strong ever since and is still having an impact. And, 3 years in, we wrote a book together about it and really wanted to bring this more than a concept, but operationalize this for other companies, right? It's this idea of how do you operationalize the soul of your company without losing your soul? Right. Because some companies don't have a soul, right? Yep. And so if we believe that, we have to believe that some companies do. Mm-hmm. So when you have a soul, how do you operationalize that? And how do you get everybody connected into that where they feel that their everyday work brings them a sense of fulfillment? Right. And so, that commitment, it really starts with leadership. Culture is a consequence of leadership, and for Scott to take that step forward, it wasn't immediate. Let me say that too. Right. He wasn't like, let's go for it tomorrow. It took like months, and it also took a traumatic brain injury for him to call me. He was outside skateboarding with his son. At the time was 5 years old, and Scott got on the skateboard and slipped and landed on the back of his head and had 3 skull fractures and internal bleeding in his brain. This was after our lunch together. Oh my gosh. I know. Holy cow. Lifeline to Fort Wayne, near death experience. In his life, and the joke now is it took that knock to the head to hire me, but at the time, not so much of a joke, right. And but that became one of his life defining moments. Yeah. And so my life and purpose and calling that I really felt really strong in that nonprofit space collided with his sense of wanting to bring that same passion to his employees who, he owned Verizon stores, you think about 23-year-olds coming to work. They're not like, yes, I can't wait to show up at the store and sell phones to people, Right. So where do we find passion when our work doesn't give it to us naturally? Right. And finding that outside of work, but connected to it in terms of community engagement and impact was really, that was the driver of it, and I'm finding that more and more companies are saying like, how do we engage with people? Yeah. And it's that community impact.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure at the time when you guys look at where you were to where you are today, some of that is how do you keep that culture while growing? And so like when we were in the office and you look at the timeline that's on the wall, I was thinking, I'm like, wow, you think about, we weren't talking about culture 15, 20 years ago. And so now it's you have to breathe culture. And so, and I look at Round Room and the work that you guys do, and the growth has been substantial. Yeah. And so, how do you and Scott, when you guys talk about culture, you talk about those things, what does that look like over the years as you guys have grown as well? Because, if you're a one person, then two, you've doubled your staff, right? And then 2 to 3 to 4, and you're trying to keep that mold, but sometimes you have to change it every once in a while as people as the organization gets bigger. And so what is that like when you talk about culture and where you guys were and where you are today, and how do you keep that within the messaging as you grow?
I love you saying that, because like one of the greatest risks of a growing organization is you lose what made you special when you first started, right? And so we had to right away start making promises. We went from having values as a company to making promises.
I love that.
And so we promised to care about each other and the world around us. We promised to drive the business to greater success so we can do more good. We promised to connect to one another. We promised to inspire others to join us in doing good so that we can do more. And then we also promised to be authentic in our words and actions. And we made these promises, and we call them promises. We stopped with this idea of here's what we value and here's the concepts of what we want to be one day. No, these are promises we're making to our employees. Our employees are making them to our customers, and then collectively we all make this to the community.
I love that.
Yeah, and it's something that, Scott early on made a decision, and both of us decided this isn't going away. This isn't a one and done. Once a year, we're going to go out and clean up the neighborhood, and that's going to give people this sense of like we care.
Yeah.
No, this is going to be operationalized in the quarterly rhythm of the company. It's like this heartbeat.
Love that.
And
I always think of values as macro.
Yeah.
So it's hard to figure out to your point, I think it's hard to figure out your why in an organization as it gets bigger when the value is so macro. It's like, well, where do I fit in it? And so I love that. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I love that because the promises bring it back down to a micro level of the person.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I wanted to make sure we hit on, so people that are listening, like, I think that's huge. It's like, because we, even us as an organization, we have values, and now I think about them, it's very macro. And sometimes it's even for organizations, it's about your client, or it's about the external factors. And sometimes we forget that sometimes the values and purposes selfishly need to be also internal.
Yeah.
And I think that's, anyway, sorry.
No,
I love that, value versus a promise.
Yeah, to your point, like, and also what is that internal culture, right?
Yeah.
And how are we creating that rhythm? So what you were saying about like how has this continued? It's because leadership determined that this is the North Star, right? Like this is the way we're going to function as a company. And having that quarterly framework, we have strategies for everything. We measure, revenue, we measure production. Why not measure the culture that drives all of that?
That's amazing.
Because without culture, really, what do you have? And I really say that in a way that says like, it's your greatest advantage, but it's also your greatest risk. Because you can have everything, moving forward and growing as an organization, but if you don't have the culture to support it, and I just think that culture just becomes this wind in your sails that allows you to really move forward and progress. And so we had to commit to operationalizing the good, and doing so in a way that was predictable. There was a consistency to it. There was the employees knew this wasn't going away.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, is understanding that it is constantly in front of them. The revenue numbers are constantly in front of them. The X, Y, and Z are constantly in front of them, but including that as a piece that is always in front of them.
Right.
I think that sometimes we, when revenue may not be where it needs to be, or when things may not, sometimes if you're on the life raft, and there's only 4 items.
Right.
Sometimes something has to get tossed over, and
culture goes off the side.
That's what you worry about, right? It's like, okay, we're not doing well in one of these things, and I need one of these things to be successful. So what do we get rid of sometimes, and not intentionally? Sometimes it's just
priorities, right? Like, how do we prioritize 100%. Culture in the middle of that, in the the rapids,
the peaks and valleys? So when culture's great at the peak. It's a little harder sometimes when you're in the valley.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes knowing, we see this sometimes in our organization, is when there's a valley or there's something, if you have culture while you're going into the valley, sometimes it's the culture that brings you out of it.
Yeah.
And because you can rely on each other, you can be authentic with each other, just the things that you are saying.
Yeah.
And so it's always great to have them, but you have to keep them consistent, to your point, so that when things aren't going in any business the way you expect them, those values still remain, and how we treat and talk and act as an organization. And I think that's pretty powerful, I think.
Yeah, it is. And, I think at the end of the day, whatever you prioritize, whatever you celebrate and continue to celebrate, you don't want culture to be something that people feel like you're tolerating it, or like we have to do this. You want the culture to feel like this is something that is not just a perk, right? Or not just a function of HR.
Right.
This is all of us, and I always say, like, as a leader within any organization, like, all you have is emotional connection with people. Because once that's lost, you have nothing. Right? You're just driving results and trying to get the most out of people, but you're not getting the best out of them. And one of the stats that I keep thinking about, going back to, I read the other day, is, they say 50% of employees are quiet quitting.
Wow.
50%. That means that if you have two arms, one's tied behind your back. Right? And you're trying to function and be successful as an organization with one arm tied behind your back constantly. And it's employees that are just doing enough, where they fly under the radar. They've already mentally quit. They've emotionally quit. They're disconnected. They may even be looking for other places to work while they're working for you. They could potentially have another job if they're working virtually, right? But they're quiet quitters, know, and I see that within organizations so much. And what I hear from leaders and from middle management and what I hear from team members sounds way different. You know what I'm saying? Like what top leaders are concerned about and what, when you get down on the floor, is like, it's an entirely different conversation.
I mean, you speak across the country, and we talk about, that's what I was going to talk to you about, is, you look at leadership across the country, and are you hearing consistencies? And are you hearing consistencies from different levels within the organization? Because I always find that that's interesting, is that what somebody as a C level might say, like, hey, these are, or I wonder if you even see this, like, it's great. Everything's great. We're fantastic. And then you go meet some of their employees, like, no, it's not fantastic.
I mean, that's it. That really is it, man. And it's like, you talk to what is considered like lower level employees, which that mentality has to shift to start with. But, you have your team members that are no longer saying, like, do I like this job? It's more, does this align with who I am? Which is a more profound question. And I think we've left the pandemic and forgot that all of us were asking that. No matter if you're just a young employee that's at entry level or someone that's been in the business for a long time, we all started to question, like, what am I doing with my life? Like, why am I here? And because I always say culture is how most people feel, then believe, then behave most of the time. Most of the time. Love that. It's a progression, right? It's a sequence. And so you have those team members that are saying, how do I feel here? And then you have that middle management that has the demands of the executives, right? But they also have the expectations of those team members that want to feel connected, that want to feel like they're cared for. And so you have, you're trying to meet these demands from above. Again, something that needs to shift, but that's a lot of the structure that's still in place. And that kind of like middle management is where the breakdown of culture really comes from, because they're trying to manage the demands from above, but they're also trying to manage the expectations from their team members, and they feel overwhelmed and under-equipped. Overwhelmed and under-equipped. That's what I'm finding in that middle range. And
we see that, post-pandemic, I gave talks to different chambers about how nonprofits as a whole are going to survive, but also chambers. And one of my talks is about cause over club. And so you think of what a club is, and I think that's true with culture, is that we've gone from a club type to a cause. What am I doing? What am I believing in? And I think that's the same with not-for-profits, is that they've had to adapt to, well, we appreciate your dollars, but now it's, well, tell us why you're spending it, where it's going, how it's getting there.
Purpose.
And so, And so even for organizations, it's, well, what am I contributing to? And if you as a non-for-profit, and I think that's true with probably for-profit, if you can't give direction even to your clients of this is what you're investing in, this is how you're investing in it, and then trickling that down into the organization so that whether your team, like I use our team, whether you're doing events, whether you're doing retention, whether you're doing marketing, whether you're doing the finances, there's a reason and where it's going. And I think that's where post-pandemic, there's that cause piece has just made its way to the top. And people are asking a lot of questions of, if I invest these dollars, where are they going? What impact have they made? And so you look at like Chambers as a whole, we used to be graded by the number of people that attended a lunch. If there were 200 people at a lunch, man, they're doing so good. Like, wow. Well, when that went away, you then had to have something tangible for them to go, well, I can't attend any of your events, so what are you good for? And so that's when we began to invest in so many things in the community. So then when we walk into Round Room or we walk into anywhere, we can say, any one of our team members can say, well, we're investing in our schools. We're investing in disability employment. We're investing in these things that make our community great. And we want you to be a part of it. Like, that's then where the boat's going. And I think for Chambers that didn't adapt, I always say this, and this is true with businesses. The ones that did adapt are going to be successful and find that success. The ones that post-pandemic said, oh God, we can go back to events. That's going to be a struggle, because I think larger employers, even mom and pop shops now that value, I think post-pandemic, what I've seen is people value, not that money is not important, but they value their time. And I think time has become it's a currency. And it's like, well, if I have to leave my office, I'm gone for 2 hours, 3 hours, I've just lost X number of dollars, or I've lost that. And so we have to value that as an organization, as saying, look, it's not a $50 lunch. It's a $350 lunch. Because if they value their time at X, or they value their time at $200 or $100, what is the ROI? Well, the ROI better be, I learned something for my organization. I learned something personally. And I built a Rolodex of opportunity for my business, or got to meet other people. And I think that's where we have to drive the ship. And so but I see that even looking at our businesses, it's the ones that are just killing it, or are doing a really good job. They've understood that cause mentality. I'm not just a CPA firm. I'm taking care of X, Y, and like they've gotten to.
You got to be more than just your product.
You
have to be able to articulate, first know your purpose. Right? I was when I'm in front of crowds of business owners, and I say, how many know your company's purpose? A few hands go up. They know their product really well. They know their service really well. But do you really know your organization or your company's purpose? And if you don't know it, how can you be passionate about what you don't know? And how in the world will you ever connect with your team? Right? Like that idea of knowing your purpose and being able to cast that vision and be able to say, this is what we care about. This is the impact that we're having. Because to your point, more and more organizations are looking, where's the alignment at? Employees are saying, if I'm going to come work for you, does it align with my values? Do you care about what I care about? If I'm going to do business with you as a customer, is there trust there that what you do as an organization isn't just about making profit? The first rule of business is to stay in business, right? Because if you don't do that, there are no other rules. But the second part of that rule is to know why you're in business in the first place. And to get back to that is the work that I do with a lot of organizations. Why are you in business? And identifying, it starts with what we do. And that core competency should align with some form of, this is why we do it, right? And this is how we not only this is why we care, but this is how we operationalize that in a way that we can make a difference together. Yeah. That shared purpose is really the difference maker that I'm finding when I go do keynotes or workshops with organizations, or, we have the Community Impact Awards, where we're awarding organizations throughout the country for the good that they do. And it's not just about being seen. It's not just about, hey, I got bragging rights. We care about this stuff. Yep. I always say you should never do good to be seen, but you should always be seen doing good.
I love that.
Always be seen doing good, right?
I love that.
That's the idea. It's not about doing it to brag. It's about how are we inspiring people, right? We have this opportunity. Our employees are working for us for a third of their day. They're putting in, 8 or more hours a day. They're giving their time. By the time a lot of employees are going home, they're exhausted. They don't have the opportunity then to be creative or to have creative expression or to do what they really love to do. So how do we craft that passion into their everyday work, and where it's not just, hey, you got to get these things done, but how do we craft what they care about into their work so that it personalizes and rehumanizes this work experience,
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, man.
So let me ask you a question. This is more general. Is if somebody is watching this and is like, okay, they're having that moment where they're like, okay, I need this.
Yeah.
How do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, Ryan at cultureofgood.com.
Love it.
Yeah, so you just email.
I want to make sure, because somebody somewhere is
still using email.
Yeah, there you go. That's good.
Ryan at cultureofgood.com. You can go on cultureofgood.com, our website.
Love it.
All that contact comes through me. We're a small team. It's me, and then we have a resource team around us, and we have Round Room, a larger conglomerate umbrella that's over us, and a lot of support. But yeah, it's that simple. Ryan at culture.
I didn't want to forget that. That's
I appreciate it.
You and I talked about our brains and how they function. I got to make sure
when it pops into our head, we got to say
I'm like, if I don't, then when I get to the car, I'm going to go, oh, Ryan.
Yeah. And I would have forgot it too. So I appreciate that.
Well, as we kind of wrap up, I want to just think about leadership as a whole. You see this across the country. Different forms of leadership, different struggles with leadership, things like that. And one of the things I really wanted to do on this podcast is kind of a final thoughts.
Yeah.
And so what, if you were going to leave we've talked about a lot of stuff, which has been awesome. But what's one final thought that you have when it comes to leadership and what businesses that are watching and listening, what they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I'm going to shift it for a second with leadership. I'm going to ask a simple question to the audience and ask, like, how well are you leading you? Self-leadership.
I love that.
I think it's a good moment to pause and really consider and self-reflect. I just had a conversation with a business owner a few days ago after having a workshop about self-leadership, and he came up and said, I don't know that I've ever practiced self-reflection, ever.
That's huge.
And we get so busy in building business, building our team, building others, and we forget that, the highest call of leadership is to lead oneself well. Because if you don't have self-leadership, you've lost the ability to lead others. You have to practice that self-care. How well are you caring for you? Are you okay? Right? I always encourage leaders to start their day with reflection and end it with self-reflection.
I love that.
And one of the ways in the morning that I self-reflect is I look in the mirror and I don't just take a glance. Sometimes it's ugly.
I love it.
Sometimes it's an ugly look, man.
I love it.
But I look at myself in the eyes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't just, I really intently look and I ask those serious questions of myself, and how well are you doing, Ryan? Are you doing okay?
Yeah.
What do you need today from yourself? And I think as we practice that self-leadership, that is the difference maker. Our teams will see it. Our organizations will be better. We can't just keep leading out of authority over people, but we have to start leading rather than a top-down idea, an inside-out And so we have to start from the inside. And we have to dig inside to those ugly, good, bad, and ugly parts. It's not always ugly. There's good stuff too. And sometimes I'll look in the mirror, I'm like, hey, you're rocking it. Good job, you know, and encouraging myself. It's not just like looking for the negative, but it's also like, how are we encouraging ourselves? How are we recognizing good work, right? All this stuff that we do with our teams and with our businesses, how are we building and how are we leading ourselves? And that to me is like just a pause for our listeners to kind of think about, is how well are you leading you?
Yeah. I love that. I give my son a hard time because he'll come home from school and I say, what was good today?
Yeah.
And he'll go, it was good. And you as a parent, you're like, come on, man. Like, what was great? And you worry about that. And then I laugh because sometimes then I come home and my wife's like, well, what was good today? And I go, I don't know. It was fun. It was fine. It was good. And you have that like one word answer, but you don't take the time to reflect and say, even if it wasn't a great day, you don't take the time to reflect the little wins, or you don't take time to reflect those things. And I think 100% of what you're saying is, as a leader, your mental health and the way that you function as a person, number one, if they have high energy like us, it's very noticeable because it's very hard to hide it.
Right.
Because if you're not walking in, guns blazing, even if your energy is from here to here, and maybe it's not,
they can
feel
it.
They can feel that energy. And I think that's important, as you were saying, talking to the audience, is that self-reflection is huge as a leader. We don't give ourselves enough grace sometimes. We don't give ourselves enough opportunity to fail sometimes. And we need to be okay with that. And I think for folks that struggle with that, the moment you realize that's okay is when you become a better leader. And I think that's huge.
Well, because if you're caring for your own well-being, the future is really about organizations prioritizing the well-being of their employees. The more that employees are concerned that AI is going to take their job and technology is going to shift the work experience collectively, to rehumanize that, and the leaders that are leading themselves well. You can tell a leader that cares for themselves well because they have the capacity and the agency to care for others well. And it's the leaders that aren't able to care and aren't able to focus on that well-being. You say, okay, it has to start with me. It has to start with me. And that is, looking in the mirror and not just saying, hey, how are you doing? But saying it twice. Because we need to do that with our team members too. Not just, hey, how you doing? Walking down the hallway. And we do that to ourselves. Hey, how you doing? And then we just walk past. We don't really want to know. You know what I'm saying? We have to ask it twice. No, how are you today? How are you? And then at the end of the day, reflecting and say, did I show up? Did I show up for myself? Did I show up for my team? How did I show up? And doing that self-reflection at the end of the day, I think is so important, man.
That's awesome.
It's everything.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for being our first guest.
The inaugural.
We've set the bar very high. So
thank you so much.
No, seriously. And you and I have gotten to know each other over years, and it's just so much fun talking with you. Not only your energy, but because it gives us that it gives me the energy for like the rest of the day.
Awesome.
Because I feel like I can go take on the world. So I really appreciate it. I really, really do. And so for those of you that are listening, thank you guys so much for our first episode. We truly appreciate it. Shout out to the wonderful Jack over at Babel Media as well. He's a rock star that's been doing our podcast for us. So
in Hamilton Heights.
Oh yes, and thank you for the Education Foundation. Whoop, whoop.
Rock on.
But thank you, Ryan. We truly appreciate it. Thank you.
For sure, Jack. Thanks so much.